Let's give it a second for the YouTube stream to catch up. Is that live now? Hey, there we are. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. This is the October 2021 edition of the Toronto Ansible meetup group. Very happy to be back and happening again. We haven't had one for a while. Would have been nice to have been back in person in an office with some good company, good eats, good drinks. But we decided to do one more virtual for this year at least. My name is Mark. I'm one of the folks over at Arctiq, joined here with Patrick Toal from Red Hat and Greg Robinson, which is one of the delivery consultants from Arctiq. So we're going to hear from both of these gentlemen today. Patrick's going to be up first. He's going to give us a little chat about some of the things that came out of Ansible Fest 2021 a couple weeks ago. And then Greg's going to show us some interesting things he's been picking away at with Ansible. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over to Patrick, and I'm going to duck away.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark. Hopefully you all can, there we go. I see my slides. Perfect. Yeah, so, Ansible Fest was a virtual event this year, which, I think we're all pretty tired of that by now, but it was still good. If you didn't attend it, the good news is, it was free and on demand. So it was September 29th and 30th. The tagline, no challenge too big, no contribution too small. I'll talk about the second part in a second. I'm just going to cover a few things. First of all, I'm just going to talk about the virtual experience a little bit, how you can get to it if you didn't attend it. I want to talk about the Contributors Summit and the community a little bit, and give you some insights into some of the announcements that were made and some of the changes that are happening. First off, Ansible Fest was a 2-day thing. It was shorter days. When we do it in person, there's lots of socializing and consumption of food and beverages. But when it's online, it was, I think, from 10 a.m. till 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern. These were the big things, right? So there were a couple of keynotes talking about the new platform architecture, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And also there was a lot of focus on the cultural transformation that goes along with automation. And there were some really good sessions on, some from customers as well, and some Q&As and panels on that cultural transformational change that goes along with this. And so some of those sessions were really good. I encourage you to go through, and I'll show you in a second, the highlights. If you only watch anything, I would say maybe the main keynote on the new platform, and any of the on-demand sessions that pique your interest. So we'll see here in a second. So again, it's available on demand. You go to ansible.com/AnsibleFest. Click on the link. It will ask you to register. You can click on demand access. You can register right here. If you've got an account like I do, already logged in. If you were at Summit, this year, your login should work, and it'll take you to the portal where you can, watch anything from the session catalog. There's some stuff that's not up yet. If you're watching this on October 14th when it's airing, there may be some sessions that haven't been uploaded yet, but by this point, I think most of them are. There's sort by track, session type, etc. I really enjoyed a lot of the Q&As. Those were the most interactive things that were there, and I think that for me, it's always about hearing how people are using Ansible, and that's kind of what I miss about the meetups doing it this way, is that I don't get to hear how you're using it. So, but there's lots of great sessions. Please go. It's free to register. You can watch any of the sessions, any of the keynotes, and like I said, it's really great that you can see it on demand, because normally when it's in person, some of the sessions don't get published afterwards. So that's the highlight of the on-demand portal. Again, I'll talk about some of the announcements. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the Contributors Summit, and this was the day before and the day after Fest, and there's a link here where you can go to the Contributor Summit page, and so it's hackmd.io hosted. I'm sure you can find this if you Google it as well. But the Contributor Summit was very good for me, especially because um, as somebody who's a casual contributor to Ansible, I always find like, hey, I want to add some value. I want to submit a PR, or I want to contribute a module or what have you. But I never get around to doing it. And so the days were kind of split into two. So day one, I thought it was at the top, but I guess it's at the bottom now. Day one was kind of an introduction, right? So if you're thinking about getting involved in Ansible in the community, but you don't know how, definitely go through and have a look at this page here. So there's self-paced Instruct Labs, and this is basically how to develop a module, how to contribute back, how to do tests, etc. And so day one in the Contributor Summit was all about kind of opening up the community to more contributors. How do we get more people involved? That's a thing that we're always trying to do in the Ansible community. And quite frankly, I mean, most of the community, the development side on Ansible core, not the modules, but Ansible core and AWX and all of the components that make up the core of the language and the platform, it's mostly Red Hat folks. And we'd really like to do more and have more people contribute outside of Red Hat. And so, if you've been thinking about it, if you're interested, check this out. The day two was really a lot of sessions from different interests, right? Networking, security. There was also a making the community more self-sufficient, which was a really interesting discussion as well, right? Again, how do we make it more open, more welcoming, get more people involved in Ansible? And one of the things that was great about this was we had, in addition to the Ansible Fest portal stuff, the pardon me, the platform that had all the videos on it. We also had Matrix chat, and so this is something that I think is really great. Some people can't use IRC behind corporate firewalls. A lot of people use Slack, but the community has moved towards using Matrix. So they have their own Matrix server, and you can get a client for it. This is my Linux client. Hello from the Toronto. Oh my gosh, I can't type. Ansible meetup. There's a social channel. There's networking specific. There was a channel on the Contributor Summit. Unlike IRC, right? There's history. So some of the channels will be logged, so you can go back into them. It's actually, Matrix is a neat technology. I'm not going to go into details on it. I got a little. There we go. So if you're looking, again, trying to be open to community and contributors, if you're looking for a place to hang out with other people that nerd out about Ansible, but IRC is not your thing, this has a bridge into the IRC channels, and I think the community will eventually move into this. So pick up, this is the Element client for Matrix, but the actual link, I believe, is on the Contributor Summit here, Matrix. Yeah. Okay. So check out the HackMD link, Ansible Community /Contrib Summit -2021-09, and there is a link here to get hooked up on Matrix. You don't need an Ansible Matrix login. It's federated, so you should be able to log in with anything. All right. So that was that. Again, outreach stuff. If you want to know what's going on in Ansible land, there's a newsletter. It's called the Bullhorn. And if you're not subscribed yet, highly recommend it. You subscribe to it, you get all the cool announcements. It's released. I can't remember if it's bi-weekly or weekly. Lots of stuff about what's new, right? When there's a new Ansible release, what the community's working on. Again, the Bullhorn is a great place to get a summary, right? If you can't keep up with everything that's going on in the community, it shows up in your inbox, and open it up and see what's going on. Right, so highly recommend the Bullhorn as well if you haven't heard of that. Additionally, there's the Ansible blog. If you haven't seen this is a goldmine of useful information. How people are using Ansible in their lives, right? So the most recent post was from a couple days ago on migrating to Ansible Platform 2, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there's a lot of stuff in here. What was the one I wanted to call out? Automation execution environments, right? So if you want to understand what execution environments are, after I'm done talking about them a little bit, there's blog posts on that here. And there's lots of different blog posts as well on different things like integrating with ServiceNow, networking use cases, that sort of thing. So another great resource. So let me talk for a minute about the platform and an update. So on the community side, there's a lot going on. I've talked, I think, at the last meetup that I did about collections. I think I talk about collections a lot. I probably talked about how Ansible Core and Ansible collections have diverged, right? So Ansible, the community distribution, is now on semantic versioning. So you'll see, if you do pip install, you'll get Ansible 4.0, 5.0 this year, next year, 6.0, etc. Every 6 months, they bump the major version number, and then there are minor versions along the way. And the community distribution includes something called Ansible Core, which is the core of the engine. We used to call engine really the language processor, the execution of the playbooks. But Core doesn't include all the modules anymore, right? So you need collections to make, to talk to different things like AWS or Cisco iOS devices. And so those things have been separated. So we have Core plus all the collections, and then the community repackages the most, a lot of collections into the community distribution, which is what you get when you get pip install Ansible, and that's the major version. So Core is going to stay at like 2.11, 2.12, and so forth. And then the community distribution, that'll be the 4.0, 5.0, et cetera. So on the community side, that's a large part of what's been taking up a lot of their time, as well as deciding where the direction of the community and the Ansible language should go. From a Red Hat side, on the platform side, we've been focused on how do we take Ansible and make it more scalable, more powerful. So the big announcement at Fest was Platform 2. Well, actually Platform 2, because secret, not so well kept secret, is 2.0 was early release back in I can't remember, April or May or something of this year. 2.1 is what we announced this year at Fest, and you'll see it. I think November is when it's supposed to come out, right? So what is in Platform 2, right? So we've bumped. If you're using the current Platform 1.2, you have something called Ansible Tower 3.8. That name is going away. It becomes the Ansible Controller. It becomes Controller 4.0. We have some execution environments. I'll talk about that a little bit. And we have some new tools, Navigator and Builder, and we're incorporating a thing called Mesh. So there's a lot of stuff that's being developed on the enterprise product side. And of course, there are upstream projects that go with all of this stuff too. So if you look at a comparison of what was in 1.2 versus in 2.0, 1.2 had Tower 3.8, 2.0 has Controller 4.0, 1.2 had Private Automation Hub 4.2, and 2.0 has Private Automation Hub 4.3. These are basically where we can store our execution environments and our collections, right? So that's Private Automation Hub. And then in Platform 2, we also included the Ansible Navigator tool and the Execution Environment Builder. So those are the big things. There were some other announcements as well, and I forgot to put them in a slide. One of the coolest things here. Let me spin up VS Code here. One of the coolest things that they've added is there we go. Is we've released a thing called the Ansible language server. So if you are using VS Code and you go to your extensions, preferences, extensions, and you search, you'll find that there's a new extension from Red Hat called Ansible, and you can see that this is the Ansible language support. So this replaces some of the unofficial extensions that were out there. It adds a full language server to VS Code, which means that you'll get syntax highlighting, you'll get autocomplete, you'll get a whole bunch of other things. So if you're not using this yet, please go grab that, because it's really super powerful. You see, I get the syntax highlighting. It's also, I don't know if they've got it yet, but you can get autocomplete and module documentation is coming. It's not in there yet, or I'm not using the right format. There we go. Let's try that again. No. All right. So it's got Ansible lint built in, but I don't have Ansible lint installed. There we go. I've got the right file now. So I can run the Ansible playbook via Navigator, Ansible Navigator run, or via the old way of Ansible playbook. And like I said, they're going to be developing this language server over time, so you'll be able to pull in live documentation, do autocomplete, all kinds of stuff like that. So highly recommend. There's actually a session at Fest about that, but highly recommend that you go and install that right away. So yeah, I didn't mention that in my slides, but there you go. And just to give you an idea of what's happened in Controller. So you probably, if you're using AWX, the community AWX project, you've probably seen some of this start to happen already. But we've been separating out the web UI and the API from the actual execution, right? So it used to be that if you wanted to install, or if you wanted to deploy Ansible at an enterprise, and you had a lot of jobs that you needed run, but you didn't really need a lot from the controller. Other than that, you had to scale everything, right? You had to deploy more web UIs, more database connections, etc. So the idea here is that by separating it out, so when you run the playbooks, they'll run in an execution environment, which is a container. So we run it, under Podman. It's an OCI container, and so now you don't have to worry about things like virtual environments and dependency mismatches between your development environment and your production environment. You build a container. This is where Ansible Builder comes in. Your container contains all of your Python dependencies, your system dependencies, etc., and it becomes portables, right? So you can run it on your local development machine, and you can run it out on your production environment under the Ansible platform. So there was, again, at Fest, there was a lot of mention of this in the demos. You get to see it. So definitely go check that out if you want to learn more in detail on that. But at a high level, like I said, an execution environment, you take your, so we start with Red Hat's Universal Base Image 8, which is based on RHEL 8. You add on top of that Ansible Core, right? So 2.9 or 2.11 or whichever one you want. And you bundle in the Python libraries and your required collections, right? And so your base collections. Now your playbooks can still add more when needed, but that's basically the idea. There is that you create an image that you can then run your playbooks on, and then you can contribute, commit that into your container registry. You can version it, that sort of thing. The way that you get into execution environments is you use Ansible Builder, right? So Ansible Builder takes some definition files, and there's a blog on this. If you go back to the Ansible blog I shown you earlier, there's a blog that talks about this and walks you through it. You set up the requirements, the definitions, you run Ansible Builder, it creates an execution environment image for you that you then take with Ansible Navigator and your playbook, and so Navigator will run your playbook within the execution environment. So where you used to use Ansible Playbook before and you did it in a virtual env, now you will run Ansible Navigator, and it will spin up your container. It will run your playbook in it, and that makes it portable and scalable. And so once I've repeated myself. So once it's all put together, this is kind of what it looks like now, right? I develop, I create my playbooks, I take all my requirements, my definitions, I put them into Ansible Builder. It produces an execution environment image, which I then publish to the private automation hub. And then my Ansible platform controllers will then grab that image when needed to run my playbook and deploy it to the clusters as necessary. So that's at a high level. So there's a lot of changes that are coming to the platform. On the enterprise side, of course, it's just a bundled installer from Red Hat. It's an upgrade, and there's I think I showed you there was a blog there as well on the Ansible blog on some migration considerations when moving from 1.2 to 2, 2.0, 2.1. Some of the things you have to consider, and like if you're using isolated nodes, that changes and so forth. So that's it. You know, at a high level, these are the components. These are the pieces that were introduced at Fest from an enterprise perspective. I can't do it justice in this kind of format. There's a ton of information there. If we were live, having a beverage and a meal or something, we could chat about the nuances of it. But it's uh, it's it's a lot of change, but hopefully it's not a disruptive change, and it will definitely help folks scale out their automation better. So I'm running short on time, but I do have a couple of other cool things I wanted to mention. So there are some self-paced labs. So if you go to ansible.com/products/ansible-community training, you can get hands-on with some of these things in a virtual environment, in a virtual kind of lab environment. It's actually it's kind of like I can't remember the name of it now, but basically, if you want to in the community, for example, you want to create your own collection, you can click this button. Oh, it's instruct. There we go, and it will set up a virtual environment for you to work on and do it. Basically walk you through how do I create my own collection, right? And so it's right now in the background. What it's doing is it's spinning up a container for me to do the exercises on, and it'll walk me through. So this is a really cool thing. We've got community stuff, developing, testing, that sort of thing. There's a lot of other stuff that's being developed as well on this. So like there's a platform 2.0 version. Some of this stuff hasn't been fully released yet, but it'll be coming out over the next month or two. So you can get here now to start. And where'd it go? Yeah, it's still spinning up, but and then the other thing that I thought was really interesting, I found this in one of the sessions I watched. Steampunk SI, they've created a quality scanner for Ansible playbooks, which I mean, frankly, I haven't used it much myself. I did a couple of tests on it, which was neat, and they have a little example here, so you can give them an example playbook and hit the check button, and it will go through your playbook and it will highlight and give you suggestions. For example, cannot find module information in the database. Is this a custom module? Or this one here, which is this is deprecated. You should use this one instead. So this was, I thought, kind of neat. This is done by Steampunk Labs, and so, or XLab Steampunk, and so they, like I said, it was mentioned in one of the sessions, and I thought it was really cool, and I wanted to share that with folks. So yeah, so that's it for me. I think I did a decent job of getting it into 25 minutes, Mark. So I'll stop here and I'll let you take over again.
Thanks, Patrick. Oh, you can't get away that quick. We did have a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
Aaron has a couple. The first one he has, Patrick, do you write playbooks with the .yaml suffix or the .yml suffix or something else?
I'm lazy. I don't need to buy a vowel, so I just write .yml. But I think that's personal preference, and frankly, I think that I think one or the other is fine as long as you're consistent, right? So whatever your corporate standard is or whatever your project standard is, use that one.
Perfect. The second question he had, I think he just wants to know if you could elaborate on what happened to the Tower rebrand, if you could give us any insight as to where that came from.
Yeah, I sure can. So here's the thing, right? Tower was a monolithic stack of stuff. So Tower had the virtual environments, as I mentioned before, like the actual execution. It had the UI, it has the API, and when you connected Tower to other components, like if you had isolated nodes and the cluster format was not scalable. So what happened was, on one hand, what the developer, the engineering team did was they said, well, we need to change that. So we need to break it apart. And therefore, we're going to need names for other stuff anyway. And quite frankly, people were referring to Ansible's, like our offering, Red Hat's offering, as Ansible Tower. I'm buying Tower. But the other thing is we don't just sell Tower, right? You buy the platform now, and it includes way more components. I don't want to get into the marketing and the sales pitch on you, but when you buy the platform, you don't buy Tower, you don't buy Engine anymore. you buy the platform. And when you buy it, you get all the components to run it, including the controller, the navigator, the builder, the automation hub, the portal stuff, the supported collections, right? Like there's a whole bundle of stuff. And so we really wanted to get away from the name Tower, mostly because people thought that that's what they were buying, and that's not really what we sell. So so there you go.
Understood. So a question for myself, from your perspective, what is the most exciting thing that you see happening with the Ansible toolset over the next year before the next Ansible Fest? What's got you the most excited from what was kind of just launched and announced?
Honestly, the thing that has me most excited is the fact that collections are now separate, and I'm seeing a lot of maturity going into the language that's allowing us to do things that are, I would say, more powerful than we could do before, right? Like, I don't know if folks are familiar with the network resource modules. There was some interesting, lively debate in the community a couple of weeks ago that I participated in. Network resource modules can do a lot more than just push configuration onto a device, right? Now they can do things like merge, and well, they've always been able to merge, but there's a lot of things that I can do now with Ansible modules that I couldn't do a couple of years ago, because we're kind of extending the language and it's growing. So for me, that's really exciting. I would say the other thing is the developer tools and the focus that's being put on making it easier to develop playbooks and run them. Like, I really like the whole execution environment thing, because I hated developing in a virtual environment that didn't work when I pushed it over to somebody else or what have you. So those focuses, those have got me pretty excited. Yeah, I'd leave it at that.
Okay. I'll just check our feed and see if there's any last questions. It looks like that's it for now. So thanks so much, Patrick. We just hang out. Maybe we'll pull you back in after the next talk for any final questions. And I'm going to just put you behind the scenes for now. I'm going to add in Greg. Welcome, Greg. Are these your slides ready to go?
Yeah, I've added them.
Perfect. Greg, I will hand over the presentation to you.
Awesome. Okay. So the preface of this talk, we're going to do a demo later on. I'm going to present the problem, and we'll work through the solution as well. But Ansible Anywhere, this is the general idea of this talk is to sort of explore bridging the gap with networking constraints with Ansible. So removing the limitations with where you can actually run Ansible, because there are typically some problems, obviously. Like in a typical environment, you have Ansible running against a target host, and that target host will either be accessible over a public IP address space or an internal IP address space. But oftentimes, it creates complications if you're exposing resources publicly, and also maybe forwarding ports, proxying, and all that. So this talk is going to explore a technology that will help ease the implementation of being able to run Ansible against private hosts, no matter where you are in the world, no matter where things are running. And so we'll go through the problem, we'll go through the solution, the tools that I use in conjunction with Ansible. We'll break down the whole workflow of what is being deployed, how things are actually being managed. And then I'll do a demo where I modify one of the applications I have that is externally accessible. One of the applications that is actually deployed by Ansible and Helm in a Kubernetes cluster. So let's go a quick overview of what we're going to actually try and solve is making it easier to execute GitHub Actions workflows against on-premise servers. So GitHub Actions is a good pipeline tool. It integrates directly into the repos. I like using it. I also like using Ansible, but when you have servers that are on-premise, or for my example, I have servers running inside of my home that I would like GitHub Actions to deploy resources to and manage resources. Typically, that doesn't work very well in an automated workflow because these are not publicly accessible servers. They just live on an IP address space that's internal. So that's the first hurdle. And then there's some other problems that there won't be the huge focus of this talk, but eliminating the application repository. So I have several web apps that I have, and I want to all manage them all with Ansible. And I don't want to have separate repos for them. I just think that creates, I don't know, I just think that creates problems for me in managing, because you have separate Git repositories with, sometimes I forget to pull this repository, then I got conflicts on that one. So if I could have all of my apps into one repository and have workflows that are uniquely deploying only the app that I need to based on certain triggers, then that would make my life easier. I have one repository to work with my Ansible workflows deploying these apps. So that's the idea of, that was one of the main problems too for my, this is how I'm trying to use Ansible to make my life easier with how I manage my applications. And then eliminating the branching. I want to just basically push to main and have the workflows kick off. I don't want to, I want to make it easy. Actually adopting sort of a continuous integration approach of always incorporating my changes into the applications I'm working on. And just overall, like this, the other 3 points kind of support this last point, which is reducing the operational complexity. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. I just want to make it easier for my apps to be managed, and I want Ansible to sort of be the sort of utility tool to actually deploy these apps, which will actually be deployed in Helm, and we're going to explore all of that within the time we have. So the technology and the solution for the networking constraint is a tool called, well, it's a library called WireGuard, which is a newer VPN technology that is sort of gaining some popularity. I've seen talks on YouTube at conferences of people adopting this tool and using it to actually build out mesh gateways and mesh solutions, where it's I think the big favorable point of why people like WireGuard is the ease of implementation. It works well with an automated workflow, whereas it's simple. It's almost, you can kind of compare it to SSH, where the authentication in actually creating a tunnel to a network is just public and private keys. So an interface would have a private key attached to it, where only that node has that private key, and the public key is what is known as a peer config, which as the peer you're connecting to has that public key as the peer configuration. So traffic that is communicating to a public endpoint, if the traffic is coming from the corresponding private key and that peer has the public key, traffic can flow. So that makes communication a lot easier. If you're thinking about maybe using OpenVPN, it's a little more clunky and it's a little harder to implement on the fly in a pipeline, which is, you can kind of see where we're going with this, is I'm basically have all my nodes connected to this WireGuard network. Tailscale, I'll get into what Tailscale is. Tailscale is just a service, a free service that's built on top of WireGuard, and it uses WireGuard, but it basically it presents you a nice interface where it shows you a little green dot when your devices are connected and everything. So free service built on top of WireGuard that I will show you as well. But what we're getting at is I'm connecting all of my nodes that I'm going to be running these applications on to this network. And when I have my pipelines execute, the pipelines will trigger a GitHub action that connects that runner to my network so I can run Ansible. And maybe we should just get into it, overview. So a high level overview of what we're executing here is, so the very left to right, we have a workflow, GitHub workflow, that's the GitHub action workflow, executing a Tailscale GitHub action. This is written by Tailscale, provided for everyone to use. All it needs is an authentication key, which you get from your account when you log in. You can create the API key, which gets inputted into this. So when this runner executes, it will authenticate to the network, and then it will have internal access to every other device that you have also connected to Tailscale. So this is perfect for Ansible, because Ansible core doesn't really care what you're connecting to, right? It just has to have the connectivity, and as long as you have the SSH private key, proper keys associated, it will be able to execute any playbook from anywhere. And the cool thing about this is it allows me to run I don't have to, install like Tecton pipelines on local Kubernetes cluster or any sort of Jenkins pipelines. I don't have to install a Jenkins server anywhere locally. I can actually use the full breadth of other pipeline tools that live in sort of as a SaaS service. So I'm tying in the networking component using this WireGuard technology. And then after that, after Tailscale authenticates and connects the runner, I can execute my Ansible playbooks, which are essentially, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but Ansible is getting inputs from the workflow. So I pass my pipeline inputs into Ansible very easily. This is another great thing of Ansible. I can just pass variables in from an external source within the workflow file. Ansible executes Helm. It either does Helm install, Helm upgrade, depending on whether that release exists on the cluster. And then, and this happens for every app. So every app has a separate workflow that is generated automatically, which is a separate step, which I'll get into quickly here. This is a sort of a big diagram that I have now, which is sort of now we're going to get into like the big picture of everything sort of in harmony. But I hope this makes sense. If not, I can take questions at the end as well. So that's like actually kind of viewable. I'm going to go to the big view here, and we're going to explore this from left to right. So think about this. There's a left to right, which is like this continuous integration workflow deployment. And then from right to left is sort of public entry into the web apps themselves. So this is the middle part here. This is like the actual pods running in the cluster. And then I have also a separate section, which is the Ingress controller, which is running. So you can actually go to these web pages. I actually have some code snippets shown here. So if you wanted to go to, it's just my first name, last name.ca. And I have Flask, Nginx, and Apache as the prefix. So you feel free to go here. You can click and see the Docker file for each one and also the Ansible code that I'm executing. So I hope this will help illustrate to you how I've structured the Ansible for these deployments. And these are, I have a bash script that's executing some conditional statements, either Helm, install, and upgrade. And I'm obviously overriding some values in the Helm release to accurately reflect the actual changes that I'm making to the Helm deployment. So again, just first name, last name.ca, and just prefix that with either Flask, Nginx, or Apache. And you can take a look at that. Let's go back here. And you saw a sneak preview of, okay. So left to right is the workflow. So let's kind of dive into this. How I'm managing all of this stuff is I have a Python script that actually generates the workflows, because obviously the one problem I'm running into is with this component is obviously if I have 20 apps in an apps folder, then I'm obviously going to have some way of orchestrating the generation of those workflow files, because then you'll have like 20 workflow files. So what I'm doing to do this is I have another workflow that generates the workflows. It's kind of meta in that sense. Like got a workflow that makes all the other workflows. So I got a workflow that makes the app workflows, and triggers are based on if I modify a config.json file, and the config.json file has all of my app definitions. So everything that's declared there is included and actually included as a workflow and will deploy. And we'll look at that. And workflow. So after that, then I have these. Now these I'm just showing two, but just think of this as like each sort of row here is like a separate app. Okay. And so we have Apache, and then we have Nginx here, and then obviously Flask would go. I didn't have enough space to just make a bunch of rows, but just to get the core concept across. Apache Web. So if you look at that workflow is gonna, again, it's gonna run that Tailscale GitHub action, which creates it actually creates a WireGuard interface on the runner. If you were to install WireGuard on your Linux machine, you would see that WireGuard it actually creates an interface like underneath ETH0 or whatever that main interface is called. And that interface is what actually takes care of the routing to the target host that you're trying to go to, which wouldn't be accessible over public address space or however. So that's Tailscale is giving Ansible the power to execute on a remote node, which is one of these servers that I have here, and I'll touch on the servers at the end, but it gets it into my house basically. So it gets GitHub Actions into my house for it to run the Helm upgrade, Helm install, and anything else. The one thing I like about using Ansible is that I can use roles, so it makes the workflow execution much easier. I just have to have tags to execute roles, which has, so the Ansible will grow. I think I will not just have roles for Helm. I might have a role for some other sort of maybe health checks or some sort of stuff that I can do. And it allows me to sort of organize my logic into different roles rather than having, you know, different snippets of code randomly placed. So Ansible is really good for, you know, being the real utility for this sort of orchestration that I'm presenting to you, and also allows me to organize my code better. And when the Helm release is installed or upgraded, it produces, you know, manifests, and those manifests are deployed, and I will have my actual app in my pod running here. And the Ingress, so the Ingress is handled by this. I have this running, and then obviously the Ingress resources are added as annotations into the Nginx controller. So that's how you get to the different apps when you go to different ones. So if I go to Apache, you see that I get the Apache one. Very cool stuff. And I think I have some more to discuss. So that's the whole workflow. Ansible is, I think we'll dive into some of the code just to see the structure. But actually I can probably go here and just show. So as we can see here, I have the Ansible role. So right now, obviously I only have one role, which is called deploy. But as I scale this, I can have more roles under this. So I don't have to just have this role. I can have different roles that target different pieces of code that can be templated. I'm pretty big fan of the templating to generate my scripts on the fly during workflow execution. So that's something I really like about Ansible, is that I can have a script that's a complete template, and I can pass the variables in during the workflow execution. And so very simple stuff. I'm generating a script, a shell script that we'll see at the bottom of the screen, and then copying the Helm to a destination. So this is copying source destination where it'll execute that Helm. The Helm doesn't change too often, but that's the workflow. I'm changing permissions, but this is sort of and then executing. So the idea is generating the script and then executing the script, which has these Helm commands here. So it's checking if there's a release. If there isn't a release, then I'm going to upgrade. And as you can see, I'm doing some Jinja templating here. So getting that release number from the workflow, I am doing some release changes at certain points in time. So it gets the latest release and ties that in. And then namespace, image. So this is kind of where it actually delineates the app from a separate app. Is like the namespace. You'll see that when I go to do a kget pods when I'm running, I'll show you that. So that's all the templating happening right there. And so it allows me, what this allows for me to do is actually have one template for all of the apps. So I don't have to have, so there's separate apps, separate workflows and everything, but it means my Ansible can stay pretty much static. I have run into some use cases where I'm trying to add some additional logic where it kind of forces me to either think about maybe making a new role to incorporate this new logic. But for just a Helm release deployment, I only have to have that one template for all of the apps. And so I don't have to really change this code often at all. I just, you're really just adding apps and it generates the workflow, and that workflow is ejected into this sort of Helm release through Ansible. So Ansible is like everything kind of collapses into Ansible. And Ansible just does the deployment. It's just doing what it receives as inputs. I think now we can maybe actually see it in action. So I'm going to pull this. I hope you guys can see that. I'm just going to get the H1 header. I'm going to go Nginx is cool. And we'll see the pipeline run and do the update. So if I do get status, I'll do get add all. And Or maybe I'll do Ansible School. Come on. Okay. Oh. And then I'll do a push. And then we'll travel back to my GitHub. We should see an action kick off. So this is you'll see these workflows here. These are separate workflows that I have registered here under this repository. We see this one kick off. So it's going to do a build. So it's going to build the image. So I just changed the HTML, right? So I've changed the HTML. I've added text to it. So it's going to actually build that HTML into the Nginx image. And it's very simply executing that by just copying the code I just changed to the Docker image, deploy the Docker image to the Kubernetes cluster. And I'll have a watch on the kubectl. I'll have that here. I don't know how I'm going to do this. Okay, maybe I'll once it does the deployment, I'll drag the window over. Let's go into here. So the build is pretty, build is pretty straightforward. Docker build push, blah blah blah. It's actually building on ARM because these are Raspberry Pis that I'm running all this on. I had to have QEMU added, QEMU virtualization, so I can build ARM on this AMD instance. But if I go to Nginx, you'll see that it's still Nginx. I probably have to go to incognito to get the change. My Cloudflare might be also caching, which can be annoying. But so let's actually just take a look at what happened here. So the first real step after it checks out the code is I'm executing tailscale. When tailscale executes, it's downloading the binary, I think, and then executing that with my auth key. And so we get like a success here. So that's actually what's tying into my network. And if I just travel the tailscale dashboard, which is where all my machines are, you can see I have these are all the nodes for my Kubernetes cluster. And I have these sort of, you can see all of these sort of GitHub ephemeral instances. So this is one thing I like about tailscale, just instead of using plain WireGuard, is they add some ability to add ephemeral keys. So I have an ephemeral key added to my GitHub Actions secrets or GitHub repository secrets. And then every time that runs, it creates like a new instance, and then that instance gets deleted after a certain period of time. So kind of adds a bit of security and also allows me not to clutter. I mean, it looks pretty cluttered right now, but these will all be destroyed and removed at some point. These are permanent ones here. So keep one. So I have a 4-node cluster. And I'm going to touch on that at the very end. Save that for last. But so we have that. And we have, so if we go incognito and I go Nginx, okay, there we go. So updated, so the image went, and so this is all running on Raspberry Pis that are local in my house. Like there's no external IP addressing. There's no port forwarding on my router. It's I'm connecting through a VPN, but the VPN is so simple to implement, and that's sort of the idea I'm trying to get across here. It's so simple. Takes literally, let's see how long it actually takes. Oh, so here's the GitHub action for tailscale. So again, very simple to declare. You just need one secret, which is you get that from the tailscale interface, and yeah, and it takes seconds to actually authenticate and create the tunnel, where I can access and run Ansible everywhere and anywhere. So I think that's the general gist of what I was trying to show you guys today. Okay, so we did that pretty much. So one thing I want to do is, so if you want to see what these are running on, and I have to give a special shout out to Jeff Geerling, because he kind of showed me, he has a whole tutorial series on doing this stuff. And so if you want to look at where I just showed you those apps and where those apps are running, it's all running on this sort of 4-node Raspberry Pi cluster running on PoE. Jeff Geerling is a great man. He's also an Ansible proponent and someone that I watch quite frequently, actually. And when I discovered him and he had this project that he was doing, I was, I really wanted to actually do it. And ever since I'd done this, it helped me sort of learn a lot faster, keeps helping me evolve my Kubernetes knowledge and my Ansible knowledge, because now I have 4 nodes to execute Ansible against on a cluster. And you pair that with Tailscale and WireGuard, and I can, the world is your oyster. So I'm having a lot of fun with this. I think that's about it. Yeah. I hope we made time. I think I actually did that quite quickly, but if there's any questions, I can take them. Maybe I'll go here and go present.
I can come off mute. Thanks, Greg. I haven't seen any questions come in. I think one that I was wondering, like, this was an interesting project you kind of took on. What would you like to do with it next? Where do you see, because knowing you, I know you're probably not going to let it sit. This is probably not the end of this project. And actually, I'm going to bring Patrick in on the Q&A here too. I see he's back at his station. So yeah, where would you take this project that you've been picking away at next?
So there's a few things I'm having problems with, I guess. Is one thing is I want to get the releasing independent. So right now, if I do a release in GitHub, it just basically stamps a number like 1.0.4 across all of my apps that I have running in GitHub. So I don't really want to do it that way. I want to have the Helm chart actually tagged with a specific version that only applies to that app. So that's sort of one thing that I've run into with sort of the way I'm deploying this with as a one big repository. That's the one limitation I'm running into, is trying to do all this in one repository. Is if I had separate repositories, I'd have separate workflows, but I'm kind of tagging them all at the same time. And so that's one thing. It's in terms of where I would take it. I started adding charts. So I'm actually trying to add all of the stuff I have running in as Helm charts into this. So I think I'm eventually going to have everything that I ever have running on this Kubernetes cluster in this repository. Like, I've added some stuff like Pi-hole and whatnot in there as well. So I'm adding all that. And so I'm just trying to basically get rid of repos where I can. It's essentially what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Right. I especially enjoyed the integrations you kind of showed off there. I think that's one of my favorite things with Ansible, is how flexible it is. And I think you showcase that quite nicely. Yeah. So thanks for the demo. I think that brings us to kind of the end of our event for today, unless any more questions sneak in. I haven't seen any. So I wanted to just thank both Greg and Patrick for taking the time. I know it does take time to come up with your talks and get the content ready. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do a call out to kind of the meetup community. If there's someone out there that would like to come and do a talk at one of the Ansible meetups, just join the community over at meetup.com on the Ansible Toronto group, and you'll see when our events are coming up. You can reach out to one of the organizers and we'll get you in touch so that we can get you on the schedule. I'm not sure when the next one will be, but I'll probably have one slide in before the end of the year, I would imagine.
Cool. Awesome.
So again, Patrick and Greg, thanks so much. And we'll see everyone at the next one.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.